Okay, today is going to be a 2-for-1 deep dive. We're going to talk about rig variants and we're going to talk about items. And that will wrap up a lot of the core editing experience in AirPig. We've already done a deep dive on rigs and we've already talked about animation. So if you haven't seen those, I recommend watching those videos first because they'll give you some context and help you understand the variants and items that we're going to talk about today. So just a super quick review. Rigs are just a set of bones, often called a skeleton, and you can animate those bones. You attach sprites to each bone, and then you can animate the bones and create animations that are just made up of keyframes and interpolations between the keyframes. This is how basically all 3D animation happens. And it is a really efficient way to animate because once you animate the skeleton, you can change the sprites out on the bones. And so in the case of this, we have a human animating, but really you might have the same attack form or shape for any humanoid type of creature. Like a goblin might have an attack like this, or a skeleton might have an attack like this. And so by animating the rig and the bones, and being able to change the sprites, you can save yourself a ton of animation time and have a lot more creature types and variety in the game. And so speaking of variety, that's where variants come into play. So in this case, our human represents both the player character, but also a lot of the NPCs in the game are human. They all have the same stats, but in this case, I want several different skin tone options. If you had something like, let's say you were making sort of a Dungeons and Dragons type of game, you might also have like elf or tiefling or other kinds of races that you were implementing on the same rig. And so in this case, these all have the same properties, but we've done a sprite swaps to allow 3 different skin tones for the same skeleton rig. So that is one thing that you can use variants for. In this case, these are all identical. They play identical in the game. The only thing that is changing is the sprites. But you can also have, in this case, I have a humanoid monster rig. And I'll talk a little bit about why you should consider splitting apart rigs and not just having lots of variants. For example, I could have all of the variants here. So I could have the default skeleton. I could have all the variations of human, and everything could be in one. The main reason you don't want to do that is when you look at the animations, like for example, the dying animation, I may want to play, so they die here, I may want to play some kind of like groan or grunt as they die. And I may want that to be different for different types of characters. Variants allow you to change the overall properties of the rig, like its movement speed, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And they let you change the sprites, but they do not let you change things like particle effects and sound played. So if we wanted to add a sound at this keyframe, that would be the same for all variants, no matter whether they were humans or goblins or skeletons. And so I think it's a good idea to make your, to sort of group rigs by type. So if you had a bunch of things that were sort of, stone based or, bone based like a skeleton or flesh based like a human, you might want different impact sounds. You might want different sort of groans or vocalizations, attack yells and things like that. And so you can think of organizing your rigs as broad type, but you can always split them out and have variants in each rig. And so let's go ahead and create a skeleton variant. Hopefully that made sense. It's a little bit hard to describe without just doing it. So this is our default skeleton. Let's say we want to make a skeleton that moves a little slower but hits a little bit harder. So I've created a new variant. I use this duplicate button. You can also just create a new one, and then there's also a delete button. We can choose to show our bones. That's not necessary here. But I duplicated because I want basically the same thing, but we're just going to change the head out with a different sprite. And that's going to be the recognizable thing to the player that says this is a different type of enemy. It's like similar but has some different properties. So right now this is using the skell head, and we're going to choose a different version of that. So you can see I have a bunch of different heads here, and let's choose this red one. So now we already have a different variant, and let's call this guy Skeleton Bruiser. So he's like a heavier duty character. So let's give him maybe more health. So instead of 5, he's gonna have 15. He'll move just a little bit slower. Honestly, this movement speed is probably way too slow, but let's give him a little bit more unarmed damage. And probably we could give them a little bit more cash, because that's also going to determine how much money they drop when they're killed. So just like that, we have another variation of a skeleton. And if we go back to our rig animations, we can actually preview all of the same animations that we have with this new variant. And so creating variations of your creatures is as easy as just attaching a new sprite to the bones and then changing some properties. We have attack speed %, damage %. So these can be modified positive or negative to increase or decrease the amount of damage and the attack speed that this variant has. Note that these things kind of compound, right? So if they attack faster and do more damage, their total DPS is going up as a combination of both of those things. So this can have a really big change very quickly. So I recommend using very small test increments when tuning your gameplay there. And then base defense is how much defense they have when they have no armor, and unarmed damage obviously is the damage they do when they don't have any weapon equipped. Otherwise, the damage they do depends on the weapon that they have equipped, but this damage % will be applied to that when they're dealing damage. Hopefully that makes sense. You can also define a variant as the default player type. So this is what the game will spawn when the player has no saved game yet. It'll be the default type. And I'll probably be changing that so that you can have a range of types. For example, with humans, you might want them to be able to choose their skin tone. And right now, I only have one default, but it might be more appropriate to have any of these and allow the players to have a setup screen. So that's all future phase. But for now, there is one default, but you can create multiple different variations. And then when you place them in the map, you can change their variant just with this drop down. So we can change her skin tone just by moving that drop down. If we wanted to place a humanoid monster here, just the same, we can change their variant by just choosing the drop down. And that's going to change all of the properties that they have in the game automatically. So that's variants and what they're used for. Now let's talk about items. So items are basically everything in the game that the player can pick up and loot. So a good word or a good way to think about this is just all the loot. You can create items that are just decorative. So like the shirt and pants, the hair, this is all just decorative. It has no defense. It does have a value, so you can buy different character customizations at a merchant. But then you can also have armor. So let's go ahead and create a piece of armor. By the way, I didn't really go through the UI, but there's armor and weapons. And we'll come back to these drop downs. They allow you to preview your items once you've created them. But let's go ahead and create a new armor item. We're going to just call this demo armor. Now note, we don't have any preview here because this could be equipable to any rig. We don't know yet what this armor is for. We're going to make this for a humanoid. There we go. Can't read. And then we can choose one or more bones to equip items to. So let's go ahead. We're just going to create a piece of body armor. So this will attach to the body bone. Or we could do a head armor. Let's do a head armor. And I think I have these different helms here. So let's choose. I haven't tested these at all. I've done this art, but I haven't tested it. Okay, so this is attached to the head bone. Now, one thing you'll notice, obviously, is like super off. That's because we need to set the sprite offset for this. And so this bone, this is X and Y, but this bone is pointed up, which means we're actually changing the X offset because X moves along the bone. It's relative to the bone. So we're going to put, try 6. Hey, look at that. Did I get it in 1? Okay, 4, So yeah, so I think it's 6 is what we want here. And so this shows us we have a new head armor. We can say this adds a defense of 10. The speed effect, this is a pixels per second number. So we can say this slows you down by 10 pixels per second, and it's worth between, let's say, 25 and 50 gold. And this will tell you the average value. The stores in the game have a random seed, and they will randomly price things in this range. So this means that you can have armor that always has a constant price. Like you could just set this to 25 to 25, and that would mean it would never change if you don't want any variance in your game. But if you want the idea of trading and like trying to find things at a good price, you can put a range in here and get some randomness in that. If I don't want this to be purchasable in a shop, I can check suppress from shops. That would be for like quest items and things like that. And if it's something that I want the character to start the game with, I can check is starting item. Description is self-explanatory. You can put a description in here. If you change your mind on the bone sprite, you can remove it with this button. But that's basically all there is to creating a piece of armor. One other nice thing is we had to set that offset. I've designed all of these head armors to be in the same place in the sprite. They're all, I think these are 32 by 32 sprites, and the head armor is placed, which means all of my head armor will have the same exact sprite offset. That makes it really easy to create multiples. So if I want a new demo armor, let's call this demo armor 2. Now this already has this sprite offset. So if I do a new one of the other ones, it should already be properly aligned. And you can see that it is. So that's an easy way if you're creating a bunch of armor, make all of your art consistent so that the sprite is in exactly the same place relative to the size of the texture. And then you can just duplicate the first one and update your properties and not have to like reset this sprite offset every time. Once you've created a piece of armor, you can play a preview animation and make sure that it looks good, and you can also set your variant so you can see what it looks like in real time. So let's say we want to see what the stab attack looks like. So you can see that this helmet is moving with them correctly. There's no parts of their head showing throughout the animation. So it's just a way to test your art in real time. Weapons are very, very similar. So I have several weapons here. We'll just use one of these existing weapons to show how they're different, and then we'll create a projectile weapon because those are a little bit different. So you can test this. So stab doesn't really make sense with an axe, so you can kind of see how these look and like, oh, chop definitely looks better. What about swipe? That could work. I like chop the best. And so then you can set the attack animation used over here after you've kind of previewed it. All these properties are pretty much the same. Here's the unique things for weapons. So they have an attacks per second. That's how fast they attack. And then there's a damage. This is damage per attack. So DPS is a calculated multiple of these values. 6 times 1 is 6. If they do 2 attacks per second, that's going to double. So you can, you don't directly edit your DPS, you edit the attack speed and the attack damage to produce your final DPS. You choose your animation here. Weapons have a collision radius. All weapons have a circular collision, so you have to work within that as a constraint. And so this has a collision radius of 5. If this was a smaller weapon, I could use 3. And you see that circle get smaller. One thing to note, if you use too small of a value here, like if your collision is just a radius of 1, it's like 1 pixel, you'll get a lot of collision tunneling where it maybe moves through the enemy too fast to actually register as a collision. So at pixel scale, when you're really small, precision isn't a big deal here. That's also why we use circle collision instead of polygons, as they're really fast. You can have a lot of collisions happening at once. You just don't want to make this value too small. You can also choose the offset along the bones. If this was a really long weapon, we could do like 20, and that circle would be up here if it was like a really long sword or something. If it was a really short thing, we could use a very small number here. So this, you can just punch in numbers and kind of line it up. The axe, it extends a little bit forward, so we have a little bit of an offset here too. So these really, you can just experiment and try typing different numbers until the collision looks right. And again, you can always like test it and see, make sure that that collision circle is tracking where you think it should go. Item value works the same as armor, and again, is starting item and suppress from shops works the same. We're going to create a new thing, and this is going to be a ranged weapon. So this is going to be a little bit different. This is still going to be available to a humanoid, and we're going to set our front hand sprite to be a crossbow, and we want this at like 8. Let's try 10. That looks pretty good. Now I have a range attack. I don't know if it's very good. Okay, so that's what we want to do. So you can have ranged weapons in this and melee weapons. My animation is not amazing, but you can get the point. If I check is ranged weapon, this is going to give us some more properties. So this, we're going to make 1 per second sounds good. Damage, we're going to do a little bit lower damage. The attack animation is going to be the crossbow attack. Collision radius in this now no longer applies to the weapon itself because ranged weapons don't deal melee damage. So we have another circle here, and it's going to affect that. Let's go ahead and set our projectile. It'll make more sense. So now we have a projectile. Unfortunately, the shadow you're not going to be able to see very well because it's the same color as the background. But now we can choose our creation offset. So we want this further out. We can kind of play this animation, and we want this projectile to be created basically where our attack fires, which is like right in here. So we probably want this to be like a little bit bigger number. Let's try like 18. And I think this needs to be just maybe a little bit higher. So we can play it there. Boom. That's about exactly where we want that arrow to appear. And so that's how you can figure a projectile. One other thing is you have your projectile speed. So let's set this to like, let's try 75. And then this is how fast it's going to go, and this is how far it's going to go. So let's say this is going to go 200 pixels before it disappears. And then the item value, let's say this is 25 to 50. That's a really big range. I have a little UI bug here, clearly, that I need to fix. But these two things do the same thing as the other weapon and armor settings. So whether or not you start with this item and whether or not it's suppressed from shops. And so that's how you create a range projectile. And just to test this, let's go ahead and put this in a map. So one easy way we can test this is let's just put a container here. And we can put our new crossbow in it. So now we'll be able to get that and test it. And let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take this. We'll equip that. Oops. So that projectile speed is probably a little bit slow, but you can see the shadow there. I think I chose the wrong shadow too. That shadow is too big. But you can see how you create and can test an item very quickly. Let's go ahead and change that. Takes a little bit to unload the game and get back to our editing context. So let's go back to the crossbow, and the shadow is wrong. I think I did character shadow. What we actually want is this arrow shadow. And then I feel like it should be going quite a bit faster. Let's go like 130. Now, I've changed the properties on this crossbow, but I already have a crossbow in my inventory. One of the things that AirPig does is when you have stuff in your inventory, it saves the item ID. That's all over in the project, you'll see these yellow numbers. That's just an ID reference. That's useful for some more advanced debugging, but this is what's actually saved in your inventory. This is really important because it means we don't actually hard code all these stats into the player save. So if you need to rebalance your game, but players already have a save, it saves the ID, and during gameplay, that'll automatically pull the latest stats. So we can actually see that by playtesting. We already have one in our inventory. We already have a save game. I'll go up here where we have a little bit longer distance, and we should see this travel significantly faster. And you see that it is. So I didn't have to like destroy that from my inventory and like create a new one and worry about whether or not the player has a unbalanced weapon in their save. That automatically just worked. So, and I think that wraps up our deep dive into creating both variants and items. These are things that you can experiment with a lot on your own and kind of figure out how they work. It's really easy to change and fix things. So if you try something and it's just not working, you can just change it. So definitely don't be afraid to experiment here and create tons of loot and tons of characters. And this allows you to very quickly build a game with lots and lots of content.